Let's talk about delivering bad news. What do you think, from your experiences as a physician and your experiences with your wife, is there a good time to deliver bad news? And at one point you talk about not being ready to hear some of the information that was being delivered. And I think sometimes in this country we wait until the end is imminent, knowing very well that the data shows otherwise, that may not be beneficial to the patient. Is there a right time to deliver that information?
I don't think there's a right time, but nobody ever wants to deliver bad news, and it's always kind of is difficult to receive it. But I think the waiting for the right time it's a bit of a bogey, that as if the next day somehow it'll be less devastating, or as if some force will intervene and the news will magically be delivered, or a miracle will take place and the facts on the ground will change. But I think I do feel comfortable saying that we are too slow to deliver bad news. We're not particularly good at bracketing it within the context of what we're doing. And to me, to some extent, and now I'm going to sort of talk from a bioethical perspective, sort of undermines the whole notion of consent or sort of collaborative care that we expect or desire to have with our patients, because we know things they don't. And we're parceling out that information in the bite sizes we think they can accept, with very little insight into even if those are the right sizes or timing. And I do talk about when Ruth recurred, she developed a back pain, sort of figured out what it was through some imaging tests. And her doctor we were in Argentina at the time, her doctor was in New York. Doctor told her she was going to die over the phone. And it wasn't like, you're going to die, I have to go. I mean, it was delivered in a very sympathetic way, and it was bracketed by what we can do. But the one message, actually I haven't asked him, but I suspect if I asked him, what was the one message you want to make sure to convey during that conversation? Two messages, probably. He would definitely say, I wanted to make sure she knew she was terminal. And the other was that she had to get back because she had risk of cord compression. So I think as a practical matter, he probably would have said that trumped it. But in terms of communicating where she was, that was the piece of information that she had to get and digest so that everything else could be seen through that lens. And I think I deeply admire that in him. It was the perfect thing for her, as bad as the news was. She would have been furious if she had been even softly told something that suggested anything other than that if it wasn't true. And that the notion that she would fly all the way back thinking one thing, only to later find out that no, that was never the case, that the treatment would cure her or something like that, or could. It was really sort of an admirable moment of doctoring. And I got a lot of feedback about it from some of my colleagues. Some of my colleagues talked to me after that too and said, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like the right way to deliver that news. And they're wrong. It was exactly the right way. It was given the constraints that we were 8,000 miles apart or whatever. It was the way to do it.
So what have you learned now about the idea of delivering news that a patient is terminal that you didn't know back then when you were just a doctor? And could you have learned that back then, or did you have to go through this process to kind of get there?
Yeah, I don't think I needed to learn that. I think what I watched her doctor do is consistent with how I would have wanted to handle that situation. And as a doctor who works in intensive care units and takes care of people with serious lung disease, that felt intuitively right. Like, you have to frame what's going on therapeutically or diagnostically with what the overall situation is, what the arc of the illness is, what can be modified, what can't. So that felt familiar to me, but it was still very different when it was my wife.
Of course.
This is why I think we're a little bit too cautious with patients. We're a little bit too confident that they don't want information that they actually do. They've carried their entire life to that moment where they're with us, and we have this bad news that they don't know. And then suddenly we're the experts in how they should figure out what the next step of their life is, having met them for a few seconds and sometimes not even realizing they don't speak English. And that it's not because of paternalism. It's because nobody wants to be in that situation. We're like, hi, nice to meet you. You have a terminal illness. Mm-hmm. But that's actually our job. Mm-hmm. And it's a little naive to think that people walk in and we can size them up and figure out how to give them that information.
At what point in your column you were talking about Ruth, this is, when you were talking about having a recurrence before when she was first diagnosed, and he said it doesn't matter, it will either happen or it won't, and he asked if you'll live any differently. Looking back, do you think that was the right approach?
It was, and it was one of those moments where I was sitting there, I was like, I have got to write about this, because again, here, I'm not even talking in that column about the odd experience of being a patient or the spouse of a patient instead of a doctor in my hospital. I'm talking about something that I do work in this case,
right.
Epidemiologic, outcomes research, chance of recurrence given in adjuvant therapy or not. And he formulated the question about the probability of recurrence in a way that I had never thought about, because I think about these things statistically and in terms of populations. And sitting there was no populations, there were no statistics, there were just the two of us. Mm-hmm. And it was really jarring, just like I said, for him to say, that number doesn't matter. Because I'll be statistical for a second, it's not a probability, it's a binary event. It will happen, it won't. Why do you want to know about it? And any number of people, maybe most people would respond to that and say, how dare you keep a piece of information from me that is my right to know? And he acknowledged, he said, look, if you push me, I'm going to tell you this number. I can calculate it, no problem. Mm-hmm. But it was sort of this deeply philosophical moment about illness and death and being human and about the risks we face that we can control and we can't control. And he was completely right. It was like, wait a second, that actually doesn't matter. This thing is going to happen. It's not. In fact, in our case, it did. And nothing about life was affected by it, except the probability that we'd see 2010 or 2020 or whatever. We couldn't do anything about it. It wasn't like, and I think it's crystal clear the way I explained it, it wasn't like we had a therapeutic decision to make. It wasn't like, well, if you have this treatment, you change your probability by 4%. Right. That's a different conversation. I mean, no one would countenance hiding information. It was purely like, we are going down this road, these are the treatments you're going to get, and the probability of recurrence is knowable and irrelevant. And I thought it was so life-affirming. In my own domain, like statistics, to see them that way, to realize what it was he was doing, that he was in the business of taking care of us, not populations, and in the business of communicating information in a way that we could best take it with us in terms of its more existential meaning. It was one of the few moments I was just like, wow, my eyes just got opened. And it's why I wrote about it, and I tried to explain the arguments, and I'm sure many people read it, and I saw some of the comments, people were like, I totally disagree, he should have told you. And I've had people still to this day say, I hand every one of my patients with breast cancer that column when they ask me that questions. Wow. And he didn't close, like I said, he didn't close the door, he asked us to think about it. And when I thought about it, I said, right, this is about walking out of here and living our lives. And if this comes back, this beast, then we'll deal with that. And until then, we won't. And hopefully the we won't will go on for the next 40 years.
So that was your experience. How did Ruth take to that kind of information?
She had a similar response.
Really?
She hadn't really gone through the mental exercise of what these numbers meant in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she was a little jarred by it too, but then, we spent a lot of time talking about it. But the first words I said to her when it's like, oh, he's right. Wow. He got it. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I think there are a couple of ways that people can go down this road. And to me, this really worked because it was so affirming of the part of life without the illness. Mm-hmm. That there wasn't a tick, 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 2%, a tick, 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 25%. It wasn't. It's like, we won't think about this again until we have to. And she was ER positive, so she had tamoxifen. So it wasn't like we were never gonna, but it was just like, go on. So putting the whole experience in the attic, and it was a sort of an interesting metaphor. Not in the dumpster, still in your house, up there where you never go with Candyland and old box of Monopoly and stuff like that. It's still there, just don't think about it. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of, I got that too, he sort of had a frame of reference that worked for me. Well, thanks very much for reading my stuff, and thanks for inviting me to talk about it.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. This has been great. And thank you for joining us.